Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the faded photo of his father. Officer James Harris had always been his hero, strong, brave, and kind. But now, all Ethan could see in the picture was the emptiness that consumed him. His father was gone. He couldn't even begin to understand how that happened. The news had been a blur. All he remembered was his mom's voice, trembling as she told him, "Your father's gone, Ethan." And just like that, his world had shattered. It had all happened so fast. One moment, his dad was kissing him goodbye before heading off to work. The next, Ethan had watched from the window as police cars and ambulances filled the street. His mother had tried to shield him from the truth at first, telling him that his dad had been hurt, but soon, the reality sank in. Officer Harris had been killed in the line of duty during a dangerous drug bust. A suspect had shot him, and by the time backup arrived, it was too late. Ethan couldn't wrap his head around it. How could his dad, who had always been the one to protect others, be taken so suddenly? His friends at school offered sympathy, but they didn't understand. They didn't know what it felt like to lose the person who had always been there to fix things, to comfort him after a bad day, to show him how to be brave. In the days that followed, the house felt different, empty. Ethan's mother, Lily, was often in tears, wrapped in her own grief. She had no time to pay attention to Ethan's quiet loneliness. It wasn't that she didn't love him, but she was drowning in her own sorrow. Ethan didn't know how to ask her for the comfort he needed, not when she was hurting so much herself. They both wandered around the house like ghosts, avoiding the empty spaces where James used to be. But one thing remained constant in Ethan's world: Max. Max was the canine partner that his father had worked with for years. A sleek, powerful German shepherd, Max had been there beside his dad on every shift. Ethan had grown up watching them together, father and dog, as they patrolled the neighborhood, sharing a bond that went beyond words. Max wasn't just a dog. He was family. When his father died, Max had been retired from active duty. He wasn't just a police dog anymore. He was their dog. But now Max was as lost as Ethan felt. He lay by the door, waiting for James to come home. Sometimes, when Ethan would sit beside him, Max would nuzzle his head against Ethan's chest, his eyes filled with an unspoken sadness. Ethan didn't know what to do. He missed his dad more than anything, but he couldn't find a way to fill the hole in his heart. And as days passed, he began to wonder, would he ever feel whole again? It was a crisp Saturday morning when Ethan first heard about the auction. The radio crackled to life in the kitchen as his mother made breakfast, the sound of the news announcer filling the air. Ethan wasn't paying attention at first, but then he heard something that caught his ear. And this Tuesday, the city will be holding a public auction for items, including police canines, from the department. Due to the tragic loss of several officers, these dogs are now available for adoption or purchase. Ethan froze. He dropped his spoon into his cereal bowl, splashing milk everywhere. The words echoed in his mind. Max. They were selling Max. He bolted out of his chair, rushing to the kitchen. "Mom, you heard that, right? They're selling the canines. They're selling Max." Lily, standing at the stove, turned with a frown. She wiped her hands on her apron and sighed. "I heard it, Ethan, but I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think you should get involved. It's not healthy for you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he's Max's mom. He's Dad's partner. He was always there with him. "I need him." His voice cracked as he said the words. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding on to until that moment. Lily's face softened, but her eyes were filled with worry. "I know how much you miss your father, honey, but Max is a working dog. He's old now. He might not be the same. Besides, it's not like they're just giving him away. There's an auction, and it's probably going to cost a lot. You don't have the money for that." Ethan shook his head, his determination growing. "I don't care. I'll do anything. I can save up money. I've been saving my allowance for months now. I can work for extra money, mow lawns, whatever it takes. I need him, Mom. He's all I have left of Dad." Lily stared at him, her heart breaking. She didn't want to see her son get more hurt, but she also knew how deeply he was grieving. She wanted to protect him from any more pain, but the truth was, She couldn't take his memories of his father away. Still, she wasn't sure how to support him. She had to think of what was best for both of them. "You can't just decide this on your own, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling with concern. "This isn't a decision we can make lightly. You don't understand what it's like. You're still so young." But Ethan's mind was already made up. "I understand enough. I don't want to lose him too." He turned away before his mom could say anything more, his thoughts racing. He was going to find a way to buy Max, no matter what. If he could just get him back, maybe it would make everything feel a little less broken. Later that night, as Ethan lay in bed, the image of Max's familiar brown eyes haunted him. He missed his father more than he could put into words, and with each passing day, the pain of his loss grew heavier. But he had Max. Max had been there with his father every day, and now he would be there for Ethan too. The auction was only a few days away, and Ethan couldn't wait. He had to get to it, for his father, for Max. The morning of the auction arrived, and Ethan felt a knot of excitement and anxiety twist in his stomach. He had spent every spare moment in the past week working on his plan. He'd taken on extra chores, helped his neighbors with their gardens, and even walked the dogs of people who lived nearby. By the time the auction day came, he had saved up a decent amount of money, enough to at least get a bid in. But he knew it wouldn't be nearly enough. He had to try. Ethan's mother, Lily, had reluctantly agreed to let him attend the auction, though her face showed how worried she was. She didn't want him to get his hopes up, but Ethan insisted. He needed to be there. He needed to see Max, to know that the dog who had been his father's partner wasn't going to disappear into the hands of a stranger. As they drove to the auction, Ethan's thoughts raced. The event was being held at the town's civic center, where hundreds of people gathered for everything from estate sales to yard equipment. But today was different. Today, there would be something far more important on the auction block. When they arrived, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The place was crowded. Officers from different precincts milled about, talking to one another. Some were laughing, while others stood with serious expressions. Bidders shuffled around, examining the various police equipment and canine dogs that were up for sale. In the midst of it all, Ethan's eyes darted from one dog to the next, searching for Max. And then he saw him. Max stood by the far side of the room, a familiar figure despite the aging gray fur around his muzzle. He looked older now, his movements slower, but his posture still had the proud, commanding air that Ethan remembered from his childhood. Max was no longer the same fierce working dog, but to Ethan, he was still the same dog who had comforted him when he scraped his knee or when he had a bad dream. Ethan's chest tightened as he walked closer. The auctioneer had just announced the next item, and the crowd moved toward Max. The dog stood still, as if he recognized the significance of the moment. "Now we have K9 Max," the auctioneer's voice rang out, a retired police dog who served with Officer James Harris. A loyal partner who worked with the late officer for years. "We'll start the bidding." Ethan's hand tightened around the crumpled wad of cash in his pocket. He had no idea how much money would be enough to buy Max, but he was willing to do whatever it took. He couldn't lose him. Not now. His mother, standing off to the side, watched with concern as Ethan stepped forward. "Ethan, wait." She called, but he was already too focused on the dog. He wasn't listening. The bidding began, and the price quickly skyrocketed. Officer after officer raised their paddles, hoping to take home a piece of history or a working K9. But for Ethan, this wasn't just about getting a dog. This was about Max. He could already feel the bond forming between them again, the way Max's eyes seemed to meet his with recognition. Ethan swallowed hard and raised his hand. His heart pounded as he called out, $200. The auctioneer's eyes flicked at him, raising an eyebrow. "We've got 200. Do I hear 300? Ethan's chest tightened. "I can't stop now," he thought. "I have to keep going." As the bids continued to rise, Ethan's hope began to fade. He wasn't going to win this. He couldn't keep up. But still, he raised his hand again, his voice trembling as he called out another bid. The auctioneer paused, his gaze flickering toward Ethan. Going once, going twice, 350. Sold. Ethan stood frozen, staring in disbelief as the auctioneer slammed down his gavel, signaling the end of the bid. His heart sank. The price had surpassed everything he had. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, his throat tight with frustration. He had tried. He had really tried. But it wasn't enough. The room began to buzz with chatter as the new owner of Max stepped forward, a tall man in a dark suit, with a smug look on his face. Ethan watched, helpless, as the man extended his hand to take the leash from the auctioneer. Max's ears twitched and his gaze shifted toward Ethan. For a moment, their eyes locked, and something passed between them. An unspoken understanding that made Ethan's chest tighten. He wasn't ready to give up on Max. Not yet. "Ethan," his mother called out, her voice low but firm as she approached him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, gently pulling him back. "Come on, honey. It's over. We can go home." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes were still locked on Max, who now stood at the side of his new owner, looking uncertain. Ethan couldn't understand why it felt so wrong to let Max go. This wasn't just about getting the dog back. This was about preserving the last connection he had to his dad. He couldn't let that slip away. Suddenly, a voice broke through the noise. It was familiar, calm, but filled with a sense of urgency. "Hold up." Detective Sarah Jenkins, a friend of his father's, stepped forward. She was one of the few people who knew just how much Max meant to Ethan. The tall man in the suit looked up, surprised, as Sarah approached the auctioneer. "I'd like to speak with the boy for a moment." Ethan's eyes widened as he turned to see Sarah walking toward him. She was wearing her usual detective attire, dark jacket, neat pants, and boots. Her brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and there was a calm intensity to her step. Sarah had always been someone Ethan could look up to. She had been there for his dad, and now it seemed she was here for him too. "Ethan," Sarah said gently, kneeling down so that she was at his eye level. "I know how much you wanted Max back, but there's something you need to understand." She paused, glancing at the man who had bought Max. "I've been in touch with the auctioneer. We can still make this work." Ethan blinked, not quite understanding. "What you mean?" Sarah turned to the auctioneer and spoke quietly with him for a moment. The auctioneer glanced at Ethan, then nodded reluctantly. "It's not common, but we do have some flexibility in cases like this," he said. "Considering the circumstances and the boy's connection to the dog, we might be able to work something out." Ethan's heart skipped. Could this really happen? Was it possible he could still get Max back? Turning to the man who had won the bid, Sarah spoke in a calm but assertive tone. "Sir, I understand you've won the bid for K9 Max, but this is a unique situation. The dog was a partner to Officer James Harris, and for this young man," she motioned to Ethan, "Max is a link to his father. There might be an option for him to take Max home today." The tall man frowned, clearly displeased. "I paid a fair price for that dog. I'm not in the mood to haggle." Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for a deal, but I'd like you to consider the emotional significance of this dog. He was more than just a police asset. He was a family member." Ethan could hardly breathe as Sarah continued to speak with the man. She wasn't giving up, she was fighting for him. His fingers clenched the sleeve of his jacket as he watched, his entire body tense with anticipation. Could Sarah really make a difference? Finally, after what felt like forever, the man grunted and nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Fine," he said, "but you'll have to pay me back for the difference." The auctioneer glanced at Ethan, then at Sarah. "We'll handle the paperwork," he said. Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't over. He wasn't giving up yet. Max was still within his reach. Thank you so much," Ethan cried, barely able to contain his excitement as Sarah gave him a reassuring smile. He turned to look at Max, whose eyes were now filled with recognition and a hint of comfort. Max was coming home. As Ethan stood there, watching Max slowly walk toward him, a feeling of overwhelming relief washed over him. Max was coming home. But even as joy swelled in his chest, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of the words he had spoken earlier. "I need Max because he knows something about my dad's death." The words had slipped out before he even realized it, but now that they were out in the open, he couldn't take them back. His heart pounded as he glanced at Sarah, who had been quiet since the man finally agreed to let Max go. The detective's expression was unreadable, but Ethan saw something flicker in her eyes. Concern maybe, or maybe it was curiosity. Ethan. Sarah began gently, her voice soft but serious. What did you mean when you said Max knows something about your dad's death? Ethan swallowed hard. He hadn't planned on saying it. The thought had only begun to take shape in his mind in the days following his father's death. But now, with Max standing by his side again, it seemed like the only thing that made sense. I don't know how to explain it, Ethan admitted, looking down at the floor. But I think Max was there the day it happened. I think he saw something no one else did. Sarah took a step closer, her gaze intense but kind. What makes you think that? Ethan's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. Max was always with Dad. He was his partner, his best friend. They never went anywhere without each other. And when Dad died, Max was right there. He's never been the same since. He stays in the corner of the house by the door, waiting for Dad to come home. He knows something. I know he does. Sarah listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. She had known James Harris well. He was a good officer, a man of integrity. But there had always been whispers, rumors that James had been onto something big before his death. There had been talk about dangerous drug rings, shady connections within the department. But none of that had ever been confirmed. Now standing here with Ethan, Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. She knew Ethan wasn't imagining things. The bond between Max and his father had been deep, and it was possible that Max had witnessed something that could change everything. You might be right, Ethan, Sarah said softly, her eyes narrowing as she considered the possibility. Max could have seen something that the rest of us missed, but we'll need to be careful. If there was something your father uncovered before he died, it could be dangerous. Ethan nodded, his gaze locked on Max. The dog's eyes met his, and for a moment, it was as though Max understood everything. The dog's tail gave a slight wag, a quiet comfort in the midst of the uncertainty. Ethan had always trusted Max, and now, more than ever, he needed to trust him again. Do you think we can figure it out? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. We will. Together. It was then that Ethan realized just how much more this was than just bringing Max home. It wasn't about having his dad's partner back. It wasn't just about comfort or closure. It was about uncovering the truth and finally understanding what had happened to his father. As the days passed, Ethan and Max formed a new bond. They started to retrace his father's steps, visiting the places where James had worked and trained with Max. They went to the parks, the back alleys, and the old offices where his father had spent countless hours. All the while, Max seemed to guide them, his nose twitching as though picking up on something Ethan couldn't see. Max was trying to tell him something. Ethan could feel it, and with Sarah's help, they were going to find out exactly what it was. The truth, whatever it was waiting just around the corner. And this time, Ethan wasn't going to stop until he had the answers. The days following the auction were a blur of determination. Max had settled back into the Harris household, as though he had never left. Ethan spent every moment he could with the dog, not just for the comfort he provided, but because Ethan was more certain than ever that Max held the key to unlocking the mystery of his father's death. One evening after school, Ethan and Sarah sat together on the porch. Max was sprawled on the lawn, his eyes occasionally darting toward the woods behind the house. Ethan had noticed it before, how Max seemed fixated on that patch of trees, as if something out there still called to him. Max has been acting weird for weeks, Ethan said, his voice filled with quiet urgency. Whenever we're outside, he always looks over at the woods, like there's something there. Sarah, who had been helping Ethan piece together the puzzle of his father's final days, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. What do you think is in those woods? I don't know, Ethan admitted, shaking his head. But there's something about it. Something my dad might have been looking into. And I think Max remembers it. The detective stood up, a spark of resolve in her eyes. Then we need to go take a look. Max may not be able to speak, but he's been your dad's partner for years. If there's a clue out there, we need to find it. Ethan's pulse quickened as they both stood and walked toward the woods. Max was already trotting ahead, as if he knew exactly where they were headed. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, and the rustling of leaves beneath their feet seemed to echo through the quiet. As they ventured deeper, Max's behavior grew more intense. His ears perked up, his nose close to the ground, sniffing the air. Sarah paused, scanning the area around them. "This place feels off," she murmured. "Like something is hidden here. Your dad might have thought so too." Ethan felt his heart race as they reached a clearing at the edge of the woods. Max suddenly stopped, his body tensing. He growled low in his throat, looking at something on the ground. Ethan knelt beside him, his breath caught in his chest. There, half buried beneath a pile of dry leaves, was something that made Ethan's heart skip a beat, a small leather-bound notebook. It was old, the edges worn from time and use, and the cover was stained with dirt and smudges. Ethan carefully picked it up, his hands shaking. This was it. "This has to be Dad's," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "He must have hidden it here." Sarah leaned over at his shoulder, her eyes scanning the notebook. "We need to get this to a safe place and check it over. It could be full of notes, things your father might have discovered." As Ethan opened the first page, his heart pounded in his chest. The handwriting was unmistakable, his father's. The pages were filled with jotted notes, cryptic phrases, and names Ethan didn't recognize. But one entry stood out, written in bold, underlined letters. "The truth is in the shadows. Follow the money." He's connected. Ethan's head spun as he tried to make sense of the words. Who was his father talking about? What did it mean? He flipped through the rest of the pages, each one more puzzling than the last. There were sketches of unfamiliar buildings, addresses, and what seemed to be police codes, but none of it made any sense to him. Yet. Sarah stood silent for a moment, processing what they had found. "It looks like your father was on to something big, something he couldn't have talked about openly." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you think it's connected to his death? That someone wanted him gone because he was too close to uncovering something?" Sarah didn't answer right away, but the look on her face said it all. They were getting closer to the truth, and the closer they got, the more dangerous it would become. Max Grell broke through the silence, reminding them that they weren't alone. The dog's eyes were trained on something in the distance, his body tense with alertness. It was as if Max was telling them that the puzzle was far from complete, that they were on the right track, but not yet finished. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Whatever secret his father had uncovered, it wasn't something they could solve alone. But now they had the first piece of the puzzle, and with Max at his side, Ethan was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Ethan clutched the notebook tightly, as if it might slip away and take with it the last piece of his father's legacy. The words on those pages were like a map, pointing to something far bigger and more dangerous than he could have imagined. It was clear now his father had been involved in something deep, something connected to corruption, and it had cost him his life. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the forest around them. She knew they were getting dangerously close to uncovering something that could put them all at risk. "We need to head back, Ethan. This isn't something we can handle out here in the open. We'll go through the notebook more carefully when we get to a safer place." Ethan reluctantly agreed, his heart still racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something in the shadows was lurking just beyond their reach. Max, who had been silent since they found the notebook, suddenly turned and trotted toward the woods with purpose. His tail was low, his movement stiff and cautious. "Max," Ethan called softly. "What's wrong, boy?" But Max didn't stop. He moved quickly, as though he was leading them somewhere, guiding them towards something they hadn't yet seen. Sarah followed Ethan closely, her hand on her holstered gun, just in case. The tension in the air seemed to thicken as they moved deeper into the woods. Max stopped in front of a large old oak tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted. He sniffed the base of the tree, then looked back at Ethan, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "What is it, Max?" Ethan asked, kneeling down next to him. Sarah stepped forward, her voice low. "It's possible your dad hid something here. He was clever. Maybe he had a reason for coming out to this spot." Ethan's pulse quickened. His father had never told him about the places he'd hidden things. He'd never shared much of his work with Ethan. But now, standing here with Max, it seemed clear that this was part of the puzzle. "Do you think Dad hid something here?" Ethan whispered. Sarah nodded. "It's possible. Let's check around." Ethan reached down, brushing away some of the moss and dirt at the base of the tree. His fingers brushed against something hard, a small, metal box just barely visible beneath the earth. His heart pounded in his chest as he pulled it free. It was heavy, and the rusted metal had clearly been buried for some time. He opened the box carefully, almost afraid of what he might find inside. Inside was a stack of old photographs, papers, and what looked like a small USB drive. Ethan's hands trembled as he flipped through the photos. There were images of his father with other officers, but some of the faces were unfamiliar. One photo in particular caught his attention. His father standing next to a man he didn't recognize, both of them smiling as though they were on the same team. But in the background of the photo, a logo appeared on a building, the letters partially obscured but still visible. VRS. "Who's this?" Ethan muttered to himself, tracing the man's face in the photo. "Is that a business logo?" Sarah asked, squinting at the photo. Ethan nodded, but there was no time to discuss it further. His eyes had already moved to the USB drive in his hand. His mind raced. It was small, unmarked, exactly the kind of thing his father would have used to keep information hidden. But what was on it? Was this the key to understanding why his father had been targeted? Max stood beside them, his ears perked, his eyes scanning the trees. Ethan felt like he could barely breathe, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to be safe. "We need to get to the car," Sarah said urgently. "I don't like this. Someone might be watching us already." Ethan nodded, stuffing the photos and USB drive into his jacket pocket. "We can't let anyone find this. It's the only way we'll get the truth." They quickly made their way back to the car, with Max leading the way, ever watchful. The woods felt darker now, as though the answers they were seeking were just out of reach, hidden in the shadows. As they got into the car, Ethan's mind raced. What was on that USB drive? And why had his father been involved with these people? He didn't know it yet, but the answers were about to change everything. The truth was getting closer, but so were the people who didn't want it to be found. The drive back to Sarah's office felt longer than it actually was. The tension in the car was thick, suffocating, as Ethan sat with the small USB drive clenched in his hand. The photographs in his jacket pocket weighed on him, as though they were a direct link to his father's final days. Days that had been filled with secrets, hidden dangers, and ultimately, a death that had never made sense. Sarah drove in silence, her eyes focused on the road, but Ethan could feel her calculating, thinking ahead. He had learned to trust her instincts, but this was bigger than anything they'd dealt with before. There were forces out there, people who had worked with his father, and clearly, people who had wanted him gone. As they reached Sarah's office, she quickly parked, and they both exited the car. Max, unusually quiet, stayed by Ethan's side, his eyes alert as he scanned their surroundings. The dog had become more than just a companion. He was a protector, and Ethan could feel his loyalty every step of the way. Inside the office, Sarah immediately set up her laptop. Ethan placed the USB drive into the computer's port, his fingers shaking slightly as he clicked the folder open. A few seconds passed, and then a series of files appeared on the screen. There were spreadsheets, scanned documents, and encrypted files, but it was the first document that caught his eye. The title read, VRS Operations, Confidential. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the thread that could unravel everything. "Do you know what VRS stands for?" Sarah asked, glancing over at him. Ethan shook his head. "I don't. But the photo, the one with Dad and the man, they were standing in front of a building with that same logo on it." Sarah paused for a moment, scrolling through the document. VRS. It might stand for Vanguard Research Solutions. I've heard rumors. It's not a legitimate company, but a front. There are whispers about them being involved in everything from money laundering to weapon trafficking. Ethan's heart dropped. My dad was investigating them. Looks like it, and he was close to uncovering something big, maybe too big. This company's operations extend far beyond what you or I could imagine. I'm guessing your father was right on the brink of exposing them. Ethan stared at the screen, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. His father had been involved in something dangerous. And now the people behind it were still out there, possibly watching, waiting. Sarah continued to scroll through the files. There's a list of names here, some of them blacked out, but not all of them. Your father was tracking payments, shipments. They were involved in more than we realized. Ethan's stomach churned. There were names, people he'd heard of but never imagined could be tied to something like this. Police officers, local businessmen, even a few names from his father's department. He could feel his world shifting beneath him as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Whoever killed my dad didn't want him to finish this, Ethan said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded grimly. And whoever they are, they'll stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. But you've got something now. You have the key to everything. Ethan's hands were shaking, but a fire burned in his chest. His father's death had never felt like an accident. Now he understood. It had been murder. And the truth, buried in those files, was the weapon that could bring those responsible to justice. Max growled from beside him, as though sensing the shift in Ethan's resolve. The dog was more than just a companion now. Max had been the silent witness, the keeper of his father's secrets. Together, they were going to make sure those secrets didn't stay buried. As Sarah leaned over to print out some of the files, Ethan's eyes wandered back to the photographs his father had hidden. There were faces in those pictures, faces that were now connected to this dangerous web. But there was one thing that stood out, the man in the photo with his father. The man who had been so confident, so familiar. Ethan's mind raced. Who was he? And why had he been so close to his father? I'm going to need your help, Ethan said, his voice firm, determined. We need to take this to the authorities, but we can't trust anyone in town right now. Not with this. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. We'll do this right, Ethan, but we'll have to move quickly. Max barked, as if on cue. The dog's presence was a reminder of just how much was at stake now. They were getting closer to the truth, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. The truth was no longer just something Ethan needed to know. It was something he had to uncover, for his father, for Max, and for himself. The final chapter of this story had just begun.